Sengupta. I'm absolutely thrilled to have a very special guest with me today. His accomplishments are so long that I will have to actually read them out. I cannot memorize them, but allow me to do so. Air Chief Marshal retired Arup Raha is my guest today. He is one of the most distinguished army personnel of India. He retired as the 24th Chief of Air Staff and the chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee in December 2016. He was commissioned into the fighter stream of the Indian Air Force in December 1974 after completion of training in the National Academy, National Defense Academy, and Air Force Academy. He has, to his credit, 3,400 hours of flying, mostly on fighter aircraft. He had commanded a MiG-29 squadron and two frontline air bases. He served in the Western and Southwestern commands of the Army as AOC Advanced Headquarters. He contributed in joint operations immensely. He commanded two operational air commands and served as VCAS before he was appointed the CAS. He was awarded the Param Vishishta Seva Medal, Ati Vishishta Seva Medal, and the Vayu Sena Medal by the President of India for distinguished service. Air Chief Marshal Raha, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. Good morning, Hindol. And I'm grateful that you have invited me to this platform for the interview. Thanks for that as well.
Thank you. If I may, Air Chief Marshal, begin by asking you, take us through, you had a long, let's talk a little bit about you before we talk about broader subjects, sir. You had a long and extremely distinguished career. Tell us what, according to you, were the most exciting, most inspirational moments of your career defending your country.
Hindol, I have served in the Indian Air Force for 42 years. I had the opportunity to serve at the highest level as the Chief of the Air Staff for 3 years. And of course, as the Chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee, which is the senior most appointment in the armed forces for 2.5 years before I retired in 2016, December. But prior to that, I had to put on the uniform in Sainik School, Purulia for 5 years, in the NDA for 3 years, Air Force Academy for 1 year, before I got my commission. We call it the President's Commission as a fighter pilot and an officer in the Indian Air Force. So uniform has been my second skin for a very long time, almost 52 years. I've had many experiences which have been inspirational for me during my service, both as a cadet and as an officer in the Indian Air Force and the Indian Armed Forces. So I'll just narrate a few of them. Basically, they involve leadership, discipline, integrity of character, team building, ethos, and things like that. So let me tell you that the first thing that inspired me was that I noticed or I observed that in the Indian Air Force, there is a tradition wherein the commanding officer leads the battle. That means leading from the front. Whenever a war-fighting mission is to be flown, the first mission, in case a conflict breaks out, is always led by the commanding officer of that fighting unit. This is to make sure that everybody get inspired. The initial hesitation or fear that normally exists in every person about going into battle, which could be, which may demand the supreme sacrifice of a person, it requires somebody to lead them. And thereafter you find almost everybody volunteers to be part of all the missions then and later. So that is something which I noticed was exceptional. And it is not only in the Indian Air Force, but also in the Army and the Navy. Let me tell you one more example about leadership and supreme sacrifice, integrity of character, In case of the Indian naval ship Kukri, its captain Mahendranath Molla, in 1971 off the coast of Diu, his warship was torpedoed by Pakistan Navy's submarines, and the ship sank very rapidly, and not only about, I think, 70 plus sailors and officers could be saved or rescued. The remaining close to about 100 warriors of the Navy, along with officers, sank and lost their lives. And Captain Molla actually decided that this is his responsibility. Since he could not save the lives of others, he decided to, you know, undertake the supreme sacrifice, and he went down with the ship. So this is another example of leadership, integrity, taking responsibility, discipline, etc. The third example I want to mention to you, which inspired me, was in 1999 during the Kargil operations. The Indian Army, we all know, fought a valiant battle to regain the heights that we had lost during the winter. During the winter, the post at the higher altitudes in Kargil Dras sector is normally vacated as established norm to avoid the severity of winter months. And then, as the snow melts and the winter recedes, they go back to the positions atop the hills. But this time, the Pakistani army had planned something sinister. They surreptitiously occupied these heights during winter, fortified themselves, had a lot of reserves, weapons, machine guns, etc. So when in the month of April, May, when Indian forces tried to reoccupy these positions, they met with serious confrontation. They were brought down with fire, and many of the soldiers got killed. And then thereafter, the Indian army units, the battalions, etc., went into action and tried to dislodge them. But it was very difficult because the heights were being held by the Pakistani forces. They could observe the entire area. The slopes are very steep, and the altitudes are high, lack of oxygen, and it became very, very difficult to mount any substantial attack. But every wave of attack was repulsed by the Pakistani forces sitting atop the vantage point, and this resulted in failure of most of the attacks, as also loss of lives and low morale. And that is the time when you know in the battalions there which are deployed to take these heights back from the Pakistani forces, the younger officers, they volunteered to lead the missions, lead the charge, and in large numbers, and the rest followed. So everybody got enthused, especially the subordinates. And later on, because of these ferocious attacks, fearless attacks, these posts were recaptured. In the bargain, of course, we lost many, many lives, especially young officers of the army units there, very, very disproportionate loss. So that is another example of supreme sacrifice, responsibility, etc., etc. So I would like to give you an anecdote about my own experience
Your own career and
during
your own experience there.
yeah,
Even.
my own experience. This is, of course, what I've seen and heard, and but my own experience as a flight cadet in the last stage of my flying training in Air Force Academy. I had already finished my flying in two stages successfully, HT2 and the Harvard. I was now waiting to start my flying on the jet trainer HJT-16, and I was waiting for my instructor. Sorry, he was a very young person. He had not arrived on the scene, but his reputation had traveled forward, and we knew he was one of the best and youngest qualified flying instructor with tremendous amount of experience, more than 1,000 hours on the MiG-21, the legendary fighter aircraft of Soviet origin. And he had a master grade rating to fly in bad weather. So that is very remarkable, and I was very proud that I would be flying with such an instructor, and I would be his first pupil. When he came, I found that he is a very nice person, but very strict as far as profession is concerned. So he took me up for the first sortie. It is called air experience sortie, in which I had to do nothing. Everything was being demonstrated. So he did the start off, take off, climb, and showed me all the maneuvers. He gave me the controls for me to fly, and then we returned. He was trying to show me a landing. So we are at a height of about 1,000 feet above the ground, at a distance of about 10 kilometers from the beginning of the runway. And suddenly he said that the engine has quit, engine has failed. It's called flame out. So he asked me to get ready to eject. We have ejection seat in this aircraft, Martin Baker seats, rocket powered. And I was quite perplexed. And I noticed I took the correct posture for ejection, and I saw he try to relight the engine, which failed repeatedly. He tried to jettison the canopy so that he could eject properly, which failed. He tried to jettison the canopy by the emergency means, which also failed. So he told me to eject through the canopy. I hesitated for a few seconds, and suddenly there was a blast of air which hit me, and I knew the canopy has flown off. And I initiated the ejection process, and the seat was fired like a cannon shell out of the cockpit, and I lost my senses because of lack of blood in my brains and in the eyes, and I got totally blacked out. But later on, as the parachute opened, I started descending. My senses returned, and I found that at a distance, the smoke emanating from the ground. I suspected that would be the aircraft crashed. And I tried to look for the parachute of my instructor. I didn't find it. As I landed safely with a parachute, and then I started striding towards this aircraft flight path. And on the way, I found my instructor lying on the ground with great pains. And when he saw me, I bent down to see what was wrong, what are the problems, what are the injuries he has sustained. His face lit up, and he hugged me to say, Arup, I'm so happy that you have gone through this ordeal without any injuries. Of course, we were taken to the hospital. In 7 days, I returned to flying, being very young and fit, but he took 3 months to recover and come back to flying. That was because I hesitated to eject in time. And this crucial loss of height, because the aircraft was gliding, it had no engine power, made his situation very critical. When he got the aircraft in correct flight conditions and ejected, there was hardly about 300 to 400 feet above the ground, and his parachute deployed only about 100, 150 feet above the ground, and he hit the ground, which resulted in his injuries to the back. So, what I want to say is that he took all the risk because he knew it is his responsibility to save the life of his charge, that is, the people, it was me. So, that is a very great point about integrity of character. He could have ejected when I hesitated because his life was in danger, but he didn't do so. Later on, when he came back to flying and he met me, he said he was very happy that I had progressed well and I was going to pass out with my course. But he took me to the hangar where servicing bays are there, where the parachute and the ejection seats are serviced by our air warriors. He found out the people who had actually serviced our parachutes and the ejection seat cartridges. He asked me that these are the people who have given you a second life. Thank them profusely. That is the time it struck me that I never thought about it. The contribution of everyone in the team. The team building is important, and also giving due recognition to people for their work. Whatever may it be, at whatever level it is very important for a good leader, for good morale, and team building. So these are the lessons I learned, right in the beginning of my flying career. And I think, it was the 5th of September when this ejection took place, and that is the Teacher's Day. So I always considered my instructor as my guru in the real sense, and I continued to maintain my relations with him and wish him on the Teacher's Day as my guru. Unfortunately, he died several years back. So these are the things which cut deep, sort of impressions in my mind and help me to be a good officer or a good leader in my service career. Thank you.
Talk a little bit then, with all the experience you gathered, all these, vital character forming experiences, let's talk a little bit about your role in the Indian Air Force and your understanding of India's military preparedness. Tell us, Air Chief Marshal, what what do you think when you look at India's air preparedness today? What are your opinions about how prepared India is? What are its main challenges? What are its main threats? What are we doing right and what are we doing wrong?
Okay, Indol, I think capability and war fighting capability, the war preparedness is a very important factor for the entire armed forces and which include the Indian Air Force. Because the armed forces warfighting capability is to deter an adversary initiating a conflict. It is meant to avoid a war. The conflict or a full scale war would be devastating for both the nations, both the parties, because no, normally the adversaries are strong and both would lose many years of their progress economically or otherwise. So, war has to be avoided through deterrence, and deterrence is possible if you have your powder dry, you have the war fighting capabilities of your armed forces. So, it's a very important aspect to remember. And this warfighting capability, it has to be based on the threat perception or threat spectrum. The spectrum of threat for India in the environment that we are in South Asia or Asia as such, where there are a lot of hotspots, a lot of disturbance, you know, uh, entails that we are always prepared for the worst. Okay, and in case a war is forced on us by our adversary, we have to fight with ferocity and with commitment and win that war. We cannot lose a war. Even skirmishes we should win, like we did in Galwan and other places. So, as far as threat perception is concerned, we all know that we have two live borders: line of control, western border, and line of actual control, northern and northeastern borders. Unfortunately, these are the legacies of our colonial rule, where the borders are not settled and we are paying the price. We have fought several wars because of this, and we have had skirmishes very often, like the Galwan Valley skirmish or the Tawang Valley skirmish in the recent past in the LSE, and LC is always live. So that is the problem we have. And unfortunately, both our adversaries with whom we have fought many, many conflicts and skirmishes are nuclear weapon power, and they have very capable armed forces. So we have to cater for fighting on two fronts as a worst case scenario. And we have to prepare for it in peace time. We have to keep our
Prepared?
powder dry, as I mentioned earlier. So
We prepared, sir?
collusivity is one thing, no, is almost probable. We cannot rule it out. But as in terms of capability of the armed forces, especially Indian Air Force, I think we are very, very capable. We have a lot of potential, potent capabilities of war fighting, especially in the area of heavy lift by C-17, IL-76, AN-32, Avro, etc. But also we are getting the new C 295 transport aircraft of 9-ton capacity. We also have very good heli lift capability in terms of large number of Mi-17 medium helicopters with us on our inventory. We have the heavy lift helicopters recently acquired under Chinooks. We have attack helicopters like the Apache and a large number of light combat helicopters from built by HAL. So we have a lot of missiles, radars, indigenously built as well as imported from other countries. So we have very good capability in certain areas, and there are gaps in the capability. I'll cover both capabilities as well as gaps one by one. First of all, the main sharp edge of war fighting by the Air Force is its fighter combat fleet. Indian Air Force is authorized 40, nearly 40 squadrons of fighter combat aircraft, but because of obsolescence, non-replacement in time due to acquisition delays, and long gestation time for our indigenous DRDO labs, the HAL and DPSUs manufacturing these fighter aircraft like the LCA Tejas, it's taking very, very long. It's taken 3 decades already. The production rate is not good enough. It has to be more than nearly 2 squadrons per year to make up the deficiencies, etc. So you have to increase it from 8 aircraft per year to almost 32 aircraft. So you have to set up at least 3 more production lines. So that is the problem. But we have excellent uh, capability in terms of the Mirage 2000, Rafale, MiG-29 upgrades, Jaguar upgrades, etc. But we are short of numbers. Efforts are being made to not only manufacture more LCAs and then build the LCA Mark II as also the AMCA, that is Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, in about 10 years' time, I think, which is possible. We're also trying to get some more fighter aircraft from abroad, like we did get the Rafale. The second contention is force multipliers. Force multipliers is a part of the warfighting wherewithal, which creates an environment to give combat performance which is absolutely top class, and the environment makes the other combat aircraft which are not so capable to deliver as good as the better ones in the inventory. So these force multipliers are AWACS, you must have heard of, airborne warning and control system aircraft, AWC, airborne early warning and control aircraft, and flight refueling aircraft, I-star aircraft like is called intelligence, surveillance, and targeting aircraft in the TVA for dynamic targeting and win the battle on the ground with the army. So these are there in very few numbers, but our requirement to fight against the two adversaries simultaneously would require many more. So the plan for the Indian Air Force is to acquire rapidly in next 5 to 7 years' time about 15 such aircraft, AWACS, AWC, as well as FRA, and get 3 to 4 I-star aircraft to enhance the warfighting wherewithal. A third point is about intelligence gathering. Intelligence gathering 24/7 and its analysis is very important of the TVA as well as maritime domain. That is maritime domain awareness and awareness in the TVA in terms of what is happening in the TVA, where the enemy is, where the adversary is moving its troops, where the targets are. Dynamic targeting is possible with constant observation surveillance from space. So India has its armed forces certain number of satellites in space, but we require much larger constellation of satellites of various kinds following various types of orbits, be it geosynchronous orbit or geostatic orbit, I'd say, focusing on the same spot continuously, 24/7, or low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, then polar orbit, sun synchronous orbit. There are many, many orbits, but we require a very large number to cover the area of interest for the Indian Armed Forces. This will give us tremendous capacity and capability to understand the evolving dynamic targets and take them on without loss of time. And that is the battle winning factor. There has been refrain in the past that we didn't have an adequate intelligence, be it in Kargil, be it the recent Galwan Valley conflict. So this has to be overcome. And the program is there, SBA's, space-based system. Basically, I would say satellites to be deployed to overcome these shortcomings very soon. Third point is that space capability would include ASAT, anti-satellite capability, which our adversary has. So I'm sure, we are already working towards it, and we are going to be successful very soon and operationalize these weapon systems. Then, network-centric warfare is a very important aspect of warfighting wherewithal. The armed forces have combinedly launched this project, and we have a common vendor, one of the DPSUs, and we have developed the network-centric warfare capability. The Air Force component is called Integrated Air Command Control System, extremely potent. It actually integrates all the sensors and radars of the Air Force, Army, Navy, the civilian radars, etc. So, and we have a synthesized picture of the entire airspace within our boundaries, that is, aerospace frontiers, as also the boundaries of our island territories. So, it is backed up by three tiers of communication system. The terrestrial communication system, basically OFCs, optical fiber cables along the ground. We have the air component called the ODL, Operational Data Link, as well as SDR, Software Defined Radio. And we have the space component in terms of satellite communication. So these three tiers of redundancy gives us a lot of capability to, you know, to integrate a lot of sensors, get all the data collected, analyze them in real time, and take decisions at the hub centers about how to engage a threat, how to engage a hostile aircraft, whatever it is. So this is a very good capability. To my mind, it's already been operationalized all across our airspaces. So that is the fourth issue. Drones, UCAVs, okay, unmanned combat aerial vehicles, besides UAVs, and of course, swarm drones are the latest. We do lack to a certain extent in some of these capabilities, especially UCAV, and which are getting the Reaper UCAV from the Americans, Reaper, and that will obviously improve our capability to tackle, targets, as well as targets as far as terrorism is concerned, insurgency is concerned, and things like that. So, but a lot of effort is being made, including our private sector is involved now in manufacturing swarm drones, UAVs, etc., besides the DPSUs. So we expect good success in about 2-3 years' time in this space. Cyber warfare is extremely important because cyber domain is going to be the silent warfare which could create havoc in any country's economic arrangements, in its financial institutions, in its transportation, and all its digital platforms. So therefore, we are very vulnerable, and we have integrated plans with the armed forces and the civil side to cater for cyber warfare. I think it is going well so far. Then nuclear capability is also important because as far as nuclear capability is concerned, I would say that we have the triad: land vector, navy, the sea vector, as well as the air vector. And we need to just increase their capacities in terms of range and yield capability and numbers as well. But more importantly, we need to add the fourth dimension, the space dimension, so that from triad we become a quad of nuclear capability. That will be in the form of HGV, hypersonic glide vehicles through the space. And obviously, some of our adversaries have already got this capability, and we are on our way to get it, to my mind, as far as my knowledge goes. There are other aspects to war fighting in terms of infrastructure, maneuvering areas, hardened shelters for your equipment, for your aircraft, for your assets, as also dispersal capability. Indian Air Force have worked with the NHAI, the Surface Road Trans Ministry, to create stretches of the roads all across the country which have been hardened and made fit for aircraft landing, takeoff, or operations. That gives us tremendous amount of flexibility for operations, as well as flexibility in terms of dispersal of our assets to save them from attacks for the enemy, especially, I would say, surface to surface missile attacks.
I have
So
one
these
question
are
here,
the
sir, if I may. I have
Yeah,
one question here. This is an interesting part. A lot of people see videos these days of fighter aircrafts landing on expressways in India and highways in India. This is something that was perhaps not there even a few years ago. Um, Talk to us a little bit about this. Does this give us an additional sort of impetus? Are we one of the few countries who are able to build this kind of road networks where actually, advanced aircrafts, including fighter jets, can land? What's going on here?
yeah. Now your point is very valid. Because of lack of time, I thought I'll just keep it short. But we have worked with the government, that is the NHAI, National Highways Authority of India, and the minister and the authorities have been very, very nice. We give them a model that what is required, what sort of straight road is required, which you have in plenty with expressways, highways, has come up. And we told them what sort of strength is required, what are the facilities required after landing in terms of refueling, armament stores, rearming, etc., etc. How to close down the runway, the highway, and give I would say subsidiary linkages so that the traffic is not stopped for long hours. And this was accepted, and they prepared a number of strips all across the country, be it Rajasthan, Gujarat, UP, even the eastern sector. So this is a tremendous boost in terms of utilizing our national assets for military capability as well. And you have noticed that from time to time, we have been operating fighter aircraft, transport aircraft, and others from the stretches of expressways and highways. So more numbers will come up in the future. That is a great flexibility that we have, the Indian Air Force especially.
I have one question here. The next point that most people want to understand is since we're talking about fighter jets, we're talking about co-creating fighter jet engines. We heard about the GE deal with America. Now there is this conversation with the French to co-develop a fighter jet engine, to co-build a fighter jet engine. How do you see such deals, either with the French or the US? And what happens to India's own indigenous Kaveri program?
Right, right. I did talk about our Atmanirbhar program and the achievements of our DRDO laboratories, DPSUs to a certain extent. They have had successes, but they have had also failures in certain areas. One of the area where we have been weak, that despite 30 years of effort, the Kaveri project did not fructify to be a useful engine to be fitted on the LCA. So we had to buy the American F4 or G404, and now we are buying GF414 with greater thrust for the LCA Mark II. And even this could be used on the AMCA subsequently. And we have also noticed that despite funds and time overruns, we have not succeeded. This is a weak area because the technologies in manufacturing engines, jet engines for fighter aircraft, is very, very, I would say, valuable, and nobody wants to part with it. Even with transfer of technology of the G414, F414 from the Americans, where I believe they have promised 100% transfer of technology, but I have my doubts till the time the final negotiations are carried out and we find the nitty gritties. The devil is normally in the nitty gritties. No country wants to part with that 20% of super critical technologies. The technology in a jet engine is basically the compressor blades and the turbine blades and the burner cave. Okay, that means the metallurgy. The metallurgy has to be of tremendous capacity to withstand very high temperature, very high pressures, and produce the relevant thrust. So this technology you have not been able to master. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do it with this uh, deal that has been signed for transfer of technology, manufacture of license manufacture initially of GE F414 engines with HL, but going by the standards of HL, who are produced thousands of uh, engines of Russian origin, even especially even American. They have serviced or overhauled many Western engines and Russian engines in thousands, but they have not been able to produce an engine of their own. So this
The French,
license production is
what
not the
about
right.
with the French? Do you think the
But
deal with the French? What about with the French? We
yeah,
hear
French. You see, the competition has been with the French. Safran has been involved with Indian uh, DRDOs laboratories who are involved in this GTRE program. They had promised a lot, especially after the Rafale program. But subsequent acquisition of more fighters, to my mind, has put a stumbling block because they're waiting for that as well. To my mind, that would be very good to have more of this type of aircraft that we purchased, 36 Rafale, because it's a top 4.5 generation aircraft, and a lot of investments have been made. So it will actually reduce the cost of operation, etc., and acquisition, management. But Safran, to my mind, has not worked well, but now they are trying to compete with the Americans to make this project successful. This should have happened about 4 or 5 years back, but it didn't happen to my mind. I really do not know the reasons. But Safran is equally good. There are only Western countries besides, I would say, Russia, if you don't consider them Western, who manufacture engines of such high performance, both jet engines for powering engine, powering fighter aircraft as well as transport aircraft. Say Boeing as well as Airbus aircraft engines are from these companies. So Safran is also equally good company. I only hope that we can get a good deal and get true transfer of technology. And all these countries, Russia, European countries, as well as America, are trying to placate India because they know that their armament industry is going to decline unless they have a market. And India has a ready market, and they're all ready to partner India to give us capabilities, as also shift lock, stock, and barrel their facilities for manufacturing aircraft, engines, structures, as well as maintenance and repair and overall facilities. Make India a hub. And that is going to be wonderful if we can really make it, materially possible in the next 10 years' time.
what this is important, sir. In helping us develop. For a long time we've spoken about this two-front fighting capabilities. Can India sustain, a battle and on two fronts on both its sort of critical borders? Tell us, therefore, what do you make of our assessment at the moment in comparison to perhaps our closest competitors and rivals, China? Where do we stand vis-a-vis China?
Okay. To my mind, uh, war fighting capability comparison with another country is not appropriate. Though you all know that we have two countries which are very, very adversarial to us, and a two front confrontation is not impossible. Because now I would say why I really don't like to compare, because you have an adversary today, they might become a friend tomorrow. Today you have a friend, might turn an adversary tomorrow. So it is not a country specific capability, it is a capability to take on the likely challenges that comes up now and in the future. So that is capability building in terms of war fighting. Now, okay, let me compare with China and our capabilities. I'll do that only for the Indian Air Force. uh, it involves a lot of factors. Factors in terms of the size, the types of aircraft they operate, the capabilities of the weapon systems, capabilities of their other system, electronic warfare, radars, missiles, etc., etc., as a whole. Then we have to go by the quality of these warfighting machines and equipment, as also their training standards, the quality of their pilots or crew who man these weapon platforms, as also the tactics that they follow. Is there any innovativeness? Is there any initiative taken by the people in the field at the lower levels, or are they dependent totally on the central control, which is so common in a communist society, communist government under the CCP, China, and of course, morale and the quality of their men as such. So I'll just go one by one. Size wise, yeah, they have spent a lot of money because they're flushed with funds after the economic success. They realize their need to build up their arm and warfighting capability in terms of indigenous production of fighter aircraft, transport aircraft, helicopters, attack helicopters, and also transport aircraft, etc., missiles, weapons, electronic warfare systems, and a lot many things. This is as far as the Air Force is concerned. So they have large number of aircraft, many types of aircraft, claim to have a lot of capabilities, including the FGFA type, that is fifth generation fighter aircraft with stealth technology, carrier operations, etc. We have seen those, but the world knows and we know that most of these weapon systems, which they have brought in the inventory after a lot of budgetary allocations and research and development, are not up to the mark. If you compare it with the Western standards or Russian standard, most of these have been reverse engineered. But that's a very good quality, I think, that you can reverse engineer. You have the intelligence to do so. But in terms of quality, they are deficient, they are not reliable, and they are suspect. So as far as Indian Air Force's capability concerned, I think it is superior because we have mostly Western technologies, Western equipment, and a fighting platform. So quality-wise, we are better off. But quantity-wise, they are better off, and it becomes easy to replace the losses. Replenishment during wartime is very important, and that is where they are better off than we are in terms of numbers, but not in terms of quality or technological edge that we normally define it as. So that is one aspect. Third is the infrastructure. Now, if you take the Tibet Autonomous Region, they really had nothing much in terms of infrastructure till about last 10, 12 years. So recently, they have actually accelerated creation of infrastructure, not only road and rail, but also air assets in terms of airfields, in terms of hangars, in terms of hardened shelters, in terms of tunneling into the hills, etc., for sheltering their expensive equipment, etc. But there are not many. They have built a lot of helipads, etc., close to the borders. But if you compare it with Indian Air Force's operational capability, because we operate from the plains, more or less, Punjab, UP, Haryana, and other places, including, I would say, eastern sector, be it Leh Ladakh sector in the north, be it the Arunachal sector in the east, we are better off because our load carrying capacity and capability and radius of action of a fighter aircraft taking off from almost sea level is twice that of the aircraft of similar performance when they operate from Tibet Autonomous Region, whose altitude varies between 3 kilometers and more, that is 10,000 or more. So you have to pay a lot of penalty in terms of aircraft performance, of the engine, aerodynamic performance, load carrying capacity, and radius of action. So if I put 5 aircraft against targets in the TAR, they'll require 10 aircraft to take on similar targets across the borders. So this is the kind of advantage we have. So that is our infrastructure. Coming to training. As far as training is concerned, we have noticed in many, many places that the training is deficient. The leadership is deficient. Morale is deficient. So they have engaged their best friend, Pakistan Air Force, to carry out exercises because Pakistan Air Force is very, very similar in terms of performance, capabilities of the Indian Air Force, and they are quite conversant with our tactics, etc. So they are trying to train them on how to tackle the Indian Air Force. So, okay, that will help them, but that shows the weakness of the Air Force pilots, training, equipment, etc. As far as initiative is concerned, at lower level for tactics, etc., innovation is non-existent because the central authority is more important and not the young pilots who are flying them. And also the quality of people. I know that with the one child policy, China is having a lot of problems inspiring and motivating the young people from good families to join with good qualification to, to join the armed forces because of one child policy, the opening of the economy to almost market economy, better living conditions, living standards, etc., exposure to market economy, exposure to education abroad is actually working as a detriment to induction of good people. I can give you an anecdote here. In 2005, I had laid as an air commodore a combined delegation of Army, Navy, and the Air Force to join a symposium in Beijing, 2005, in the NDU, which was conducted over about a week. And many, many air forces, mostly very advanced and capable air forces, are invited. And Air Force, Indian Armed Forces is one of them. So they had given us 1.5 days to conduct the briefing about how we conduct our training, our intake, and what is the end result. So this carried on for 1.5 days because we had to speak in English and that was translated into their Chinese language and question answer session. It took very, very long. Each session took 3 hours plus, and I had to do joint training as well as Air Force training. So I took almost 6 hours. And while the Army and naval officers also did their part. But in the question answer session, the NDU audience consisted of all commanders and COs and commandants of their training academies all across from all the three services of the PLA. So the pattern of questions that they asked, I realized that they are having acute problem in getting good quality intake as officers because it's a conscription and the best of the people avoid coming there because of one child policy, etc., etc. And their performance in the communes is more important than what the capability is. So they were facing a lot of problems. They asked us, how do you manage to get good people as intake for your armed forces? And so we have a lot of institutes, our educational standards are high. We have a lot of engineers and postgraduates, graduates who voluntarily join the armed forces. We don't need any conscription and we are happy with the performance. They are motivated and they are well off in terms of their knowledge, professionally or otherwise. So that is the crux that
Very important point, sir.
they may
So
have more numbers, they may have advanced technologies, but who are manning them? Because morale, discipline, leadership is more important in winning a conflict than the quality of your weapons, quality of your infrastructure.
yeah,
Because then, the examples are there. Afghanistan, Vietnam, the mightiest of the superpowers are involved in a conflict with the best of the equipment, best of the trained people, but they lost because morale and leadership was better and of the adversaries than the American and the Allied forces, and they finally had to leave, leaving behind their friends. So that is the kind of situation
very,
I
very
think.
important point. After all, no matter what the equipment, as
Yeah,
so many people say, it's the person behind the equipment that's most important.
absolutely,
The
absolutely right,
mind
absolutely.
that behind the as we
Yeah,
come to the end of this conversation, sir, I have one last question, which I've asked many other people, and I want your opinion. For a long time, India was to get a comprehensive security framework. This comprehensive security framework seems to be missing. There seems to be constant dialogue, conversation, deliberation on this, but till today, a comprehensive security framework for India hasn't emerged. In your opinion, sir, you served at the highest level. Why can't India get a comprehensive security framework that really talks about what our security challenges are at land, air, sea, space now, including cyber and so on and so forth, and gives a framework to understand and tackle these challenges?
Yeah, I think, Indul, what you want to mean is that we should have a national security strategy. It's called NSS. That is same as the comprehensive national security strategy. We don't have one. You're true. That is true. We don't have something written down, not a document or a policy document which is approved by the government. What we have as of now, as far as the MOD is concerned or the armed forces is concerned, is a directive. It's called the operational directive by the Raksha Mantri. So that is equivalent to our military strategy. The armed forces have been at it for very, very long time. I remember my time as well, that we need to have a well documented, laid down policy document in terms of national security strategy, which will take care of not only the external threat, it will take care of the internal threat, terrorism, insurgencies which are being aided by our adversaries in some of our regions, terrorism being sponsored by the state from across the borders, as also security of our economy, security of our financial institutions, security of our data, cyber security, security of our industries, technology, health, and livelihood, so many things. It is very large, all encompassing document. It has to be an SS, National Security Strategy, not only external aggression, but everything else. The landscape or the is very, very large. Canvas is very, very large. We don't have it. All right. So as of now, we are working with the military strategy, which is the RMSOP directive, and we make our long-term, integrated perspective plan of the three services at the CDS level or the IDS level, Integrated Defense Service Headquarters, taking into consideration the capabilities that each service requires or jointly we require to meet the challenges that you have to our national security. But the politicians and the bureaucracy are two important cogs in this to make the national security strategy, because all the ministries will be involved. So there is a reluctance among the politicians and bureaucrats to go ahead with this policy document framework, mainly to my mind because of lack of experience and lack of knowledge. The Indian Armed Forces have prepared this document several times, and we are wishing that the other two elements who are actually higher in terms of the administration of the nation, the politicians and the bureaucrats to a certain extent, they need to get involved, which is not happening. But if we have a national security strategy, NSS, which will be approved by the CCS or the cabinet, and then the military strategies fall out of it or follow it. And the military strategy also have the stamp or the seal of the CCS. Then the armed forces and the MOD concerned would work on the long-term integrated perspective plan, prioritize based on the funding available and assured. And also, once it is cleared by the CCS and the parliament as well as the government as such, cabinet as such, then we'll have commitment of all the ministries to work towards fructification of the LTIPP. That is much desired aspect. But what are the areas we'll focus on? I'll let you know. Okay, once this CCS is approved, military strategy is gleaned out of it, LTIPP is framed, and approved by the CCS, the areas that we will focus on the armed forces, to my mind, is boots on the ground, be it the LSC or the LC, especially the LSC. Secondly, we require maritime domain, larger footprint in terms of larger number of warships and submarines, especially nuclear powered submarines, including 2 to 3 aircraft carriers, and building of assets in Andaman Nicobar Command. Thirdly, I think we require to give aerospace its due credit, because without aerospace power, winning a conflict is going to be extremely difficult against adversaries who are very, very well equipped and well prepared to fight. So these are the areas I think we have to focus and prioritize based on the funds available. And next is indigenization. It is taking shape, and I'm sure the indigenization effort will make sure that we don't have to depend on anyone. None of the camps, neither European nor Western, or I would say American, nor the Russians. Maybe for about 10 to 15 years, we will have to depend on them to fill the gaps that exist in our warfighting capabilities in terms of DTTI, ICT, etc., and various foundational agreements that we have made with Americans and Europeans, etc. But definitely, transfer of technology will be required to get some of the critical technologies for our capability building, as also improvement in the or upgrade of the warfighting machines and equipment that we have from the Russians or the Soviet Union. The Sukhoi 30 is a very large fleet, 270 plus, the largest contract, I think, military contract in recent times across the world. And we have to upgrade them. They have already been used for 2 decades, and it's high time we upgrade them with modern technologies so their relevance and operational viability remains. So we'll have to depend on them for some time. But finally, I think we are not going to be either this way or that way. We are going to have strategic autonomy by becoming Atmanirbhar. So we'll depend on our own industries, own DRDOs, etc., and none of these Russian or American or European technologies.
On that very, very optimistic and cheerful note, I really want to thank you, sir, for giving us so much time and discussing at length not just India's military preparedness, its threats, and how to counter them, but also invaluable anecdotes from your own illustrious career. Thank you, Air Chief Marshal. Thank you very much for speaking to me and your time.
Thank you very much. We enjoyed the program.
Thank you, and I will keep in touch, sir. Thank you.